When we dance, the journey itself is the point. When we play music, you will simply become completely absorbed in sound. And therefore you will find yourself living in an eternal now in which there is no past and there is no future and there is no thing called difference between yourself and the world of nature outside you.
Ideas demand action, philosophy thrives through practice, and talk only flourishes when it inspires meaningful deeds. Welcome to the Talk Doesn't Cook Rice podcast with myself, John Staskowski, and Danny Massaro, where we explore thought-provoking concepts and provide practical insights to enrich modern life. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is something. This is nothing. This is solid. This is space. Between yourself and the world of nature outside you.
Right, Danny, we're going to split this one, I think, into two parts. So, today we're going to be talking about the self, and next episode, whenever we get around to doing that, we're going to talk about personality. And the reason that we're doing that, again, an interesting topic that has lots of rabbit holes and stuff we could go down, but I suppose the question we're exploring is what and who we are. So that's the question that I think people often maybe ask ourselves. What am I? Who am I? Those sorts of, maybe what might be called an existential crisis sometimes, where people start thinking about, well, what am I? Who am I? What am I doing? That's a nice little lead into some thinking. And a guy who's written a book recently who we quite like, Joseph Ledoux, wrote a book on 4 different realms of existence, which is a little bit of a frame for what we'll talk about today. To cut a long story short, he certainly thinks that self and personality are not the answer. So we're going to focus on, well, what's this thing, the self? What's going on there? And then next episode, what's personality? How does that differ? And just how do they each play a role in this story that we have going on in our heads, this movie that we sort of think we're the star of our own movie, don't we? And it starts when you're born, and then the film finishes and the credits roll when you pop your clogs at the end. I think it's fair to say most people, we tend to think we're the same person through that whole movie. So you are born, you are you, there's something special and unique and just only you have it, and it's like the core thing that is you underneath there, and that goes all the way through your life until you die. So certainly some of the questions I've asked people over time when doing different sessions and working with groups and stuff is what makes someone the same person over time? And it can open up some really interesting discussion, because you can get into, well, is it a physical thing? Is it like your actual body that you carry through your life and you take through your life? Is it a psychological thing? Is it your memories? Is it your soul? Is it your mind? All these different aspects that we like to think are us. You know, there's quite interesting theories on all of them over the years. If you trace it all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and Descartes and those sort of old school philosophers, they all engaged in this question. You know, those questions like what's the soul, what's the mind, is it the same as the body, and how do they differ? But a lot of those guys tended to refer to substances. So it's like, yeah, there's this core substance that is you, that moves through time, and it's just start and it's the same thing. It doesn't really change. But you had later philosophers like David Hume, who we'll talk on today. He said, hang on, there's no such thing. There isn't this thing as the self. There's not this thing that travels that whole journey through the movie. It's a bit of an illusion, and you maybe get in a bit confused with some of that and what it might mean. So, Danny, what do you reckon? Why was this a relevant chat for us to have? Why did you think this could be useful and just help people get their thinking caps on a bit?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting to me because I, in a way, as a sort of therapist, psychology teacher, people are very interested in being better and changing the situations. And some of the things that can hold you back and propel you forward, if you're positive, is the self-concept, who you think you are deep down. And it's like people, when I studied phenomenology, which is like being in, the thing of being, you're the only person living in your fishbowl looking out. You're in your head in the first person, describing and assimilating and making sense, theorizing about everything you're going through. Nobody else will ever get inside you, like in the first person, making sense of your senses and all your experiences. So if you get stuck in that, as if, well, when I was a youngster, this is what I thought about the world, this is what I thought about me in it, and this is what I thought about my limits and capabilities and how I am, there gets to a point in a social world where it's always changing, and you're changing your age, and you're changing your situations. That might, financial situations, relationships, your health, your experience levels. If you cannot grow and change, who you think you are along relative to all those new territories, then you're not going to be adaptable. And I'll talk to players about being the strongest that they can be in sport. So sports change, like, for example, rules and the body changes, or new opponents come along, new conditions, new technologies in sports. And you have to, maybe you were an aggressive racing driver early on when the rules suited aggression, but then all of a sudden the rules 5 years later suited being really conservative and playing the long, slow game and staying on the track rather than being flat out aggression. It's no good then, if that was Lewis Hamilton saying, well, I've always been like this, I can't change, because then he doesn't go on to win more world championships or whatever he wants to do. So I've always liked psychologies and philosophies that has left open sort of these developmental levels. Piaget was good at that. Claire Graves with his development of values and how we oscillate upwards through life. Otherwise, we get stuck at a certain level, and everything we see is at that level. So, there are good things about being a consistent, reliable, me, that's me. I know who I am. I am this person. You don't want to go full on total, I never know who I am. So that we like having consistent elements, but we also need elements where we can go, I used to be that person, and that was the way I used to feel and see the world and behave, but now I'm like this now these days. And that, again, matches into the summary of like my research anyway, in how one might live a sporting life, or any life really, in terms of you go through certain phases in your life, and within each of those phases, it's healthy to know what makes you tick in each of those phases, and it's okay to be a different type of person in each of those phases, and that can mean shaking off concepts of yourself and adding new things in. In fact, when I used to study neuro-linguistic programming, at the very core of NLP psychology is what do you want? Where do you want to go? Right, let's change all the things you think about yourself, so that opens up. And it's like self-belief change and all those types of things. We know we can change because we know if we have trauma or something, we change. It gets to us. We know if we have success and things like that, we change. And we know that we change based on our physical capabilities and such like. So we know change is possible, but if we're not careful, we can get too stuck saying, me, I am who I am. I've always been the same way, and in some ways that's just an excuse, and it's just a comforting story that we tell ourselves to avoid action.
I think though that, because I'm with you on like change of phases and the ability to proactively be someone different or change a predicament or a circumstance, but that still assumes that there is a self doing the changing, doesn't it? That there's this underriding core thing that is consciously saying, right, do you know what, I need to be someone different, I'm going to become this, or I'm going to stop associating myself with that characteristic that I had in the past, I want to be something different. That still assumes there's a self, isn't there, that's core, that's moving through and doing the change. Is that not a story you're telling yourself?
Yeah, well, the way I see it is that, something that I took from Lisa Feldman Barrett in terms of it, who's a recent neuroscientist, that humans are unique because we can generalize we can generalize really wildly, about so much data, and we've got memories, we've got future memories, we can predict, we can plan, we can daydream, we can scan for information, and we're, way beyond our current moment. Plus, we're taking things in all the time as well. But what we do, we can compress all that information into like an abstract story. So we're quite good at taking all that data and putting it into a metaphor or a story to make sort of sense of it. So we would go, oh, I know what you mean. I know what you mean with all that, what's going on over there and all this stuff. It's like a bird leaving the nest. It's like a fly in the nest, like a bird flying the nest eventually, isn't it? And that then you use a metaphor like that, then you can generalize that down even more to, so yeah, what I need to do now is leave home and treat it in a biological, natural order way. Don't get emotional about it because it's just nature. And we take all those feelings and all this complexity, and the brain's amazing at compressing that down to a simple prediction and then an action. So because the brain is doing that all the time and has always done that in neuron ways and all the electrical activity, all the billions of cells in our brains that are constantly like working out what to do with this data. That's something Anil Seth, who wrote a book called Becoming You, he said, we have that evolutionary purpose of being able to condense information down into a quick story, metaphor, and move it on. That's basically just the brain making best guesses all the time. What he called Bayesian best guesses, which is taking all the information and everything we know about the brain and sort of then say, well, there must be some self in there, constant self, who's always doing this brain activity. But the neuroscientists are saying there isn't a constant self in there. That's just your brain doing its stuff to survive. Okay, so it's just biology doing its thing. But even that, you have to then make a story to feel like you're just being run by a computer and no enduring soul or anything more than that. So you're right. Yeah, there isn't necessarily a constant self organizing that. But what the neuroscientists are saying, and Daniel Dennett is another one, Feldman Barrett and Anil Seth, they disagree at various points, but they kind of all agree that all the so-called self is, what we call the self, is a convenient fiction. It's basically the brain doing its stuff evolutionarily to survive, make sense of everything, compress things down so that the brain can predict something that needs to be done to survive, fight or flight or whatever, or the next move. And Feldman Barrett actually was interesting. She said that you want to survive physically, you want to survive socially, because we create a social reality. We all, everybody else, we were social creatures. But she said you also want to survive in the story of yourself. You want to keep the sort of illusion of the constant me going. So you don't like being shamed, or, you wouldn't want anyone to look through all your WhatsApp chats, would you? And be publicised. You wouldn't want everybody to know all your internet activity. You wouldn't want everyone to know all your dark little thing, because you've got an image to upkeep, not just with others socially, but even within yourself. You don't really want to think that you don't have an enduring soul or an enduring self, and that you're just some sort of evolutionary computer bungling your way through a life. It's better to think that and that's the pragmatism of it, the pragmatism of, it's probably healthier to think of yourself in a way as a constant self-soul, because it's a better story than I'm just a brain machine that reacts.
See, I love that. I find that fascinating. Like, I'm quite funny and just like bizarre and ridiculous, but I find it like funny rather. Whereas I know some people, when you speak about this stuff, and probably some people listening, it's like, whoa, I'm just not prepared to go there, to not believe that I am this core me that is just doing the thinking, like you say. It terrifies them. They just will not. They're not prepared to go there. When you talk about the neuroscientists, this is one of the reasons why I love David Hume. He's just like a philosopher who I really have liked over the years, because he was saying this stuff in the 1700s. And like now, neuroscience and it's catching up, isn't it? But to have that much foresight and that much insight into what he was talking about then is, I just think, genius. Like, it's just flat out genius. But so he was talking about this all the way back then. He called it his bundle theory, or it gets called his bundle theory of self now, which was very much this notion that he used to talk about. When I sit there and try and think about what is the self, where is it? It's certainly not an objective, tangible sort of thing that you can touch. You can't cut your head open and see. It's not there, is it? So he's like, that's a factor. But also, anytime you think about something like that, it has to go through a perception first. And for that very fact, it means that he just didn't think it existed. So he called it a bundle theory, where the self for him, it's essentially in any one moment, you've got a certain bundle, whatever you want to call it, of perceptions, thoughts, feelings, sensations. They're all in the mix, and it's just in that one moment. And that is what's doing the perceiving, I suppose, and has this. Yes, there's a story there of a past and a present and a future, but all it is in the moment. It's just a bundle of perceptions. And then in a day's time, a week's time, that bundle will be completely different, but it will be for that moment in time. It can think about some of these things, but it's very different. So like, he would ask or get you to consider, well, are you the same person? Are you the same self who was at school 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it is? Is that the same? How can that be the same person? Like, you can't even remember 99% of what you did and how you were, where you went. You can't. So memory's even in the mix, isn't it? Memory is not like an objective recording of who you were and where you've been and everything you've done. It's just perception. So even our memory of who we were probably changes through time to fit a particular story and just the current bundle that we're in. You remember things differently to try and create this ongoing movie and film that you're in, but you're a totally different person. Likewise, the person you are now won't exist in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. You'll have a totally different set of perceptions in the moment. So that was his bundle theory, and very much that there is no person beneath it all. Yeah. Like you say, you're just this all, not a computer, is it? But you're a biological bunch of cells and atoms and all those things that are doing the perceiving in that moment, but there's no person underneath it, which terrifies people. They're just like, what are you on about? I'm me. There's an essence, there's a core essence that I have that is only me. And Hume was like, nah, you're having a laugh. So one way to think of it is like a car, which is an analogy I've used in the past. If you have a car and then you take all the pieces of the car apart, so you've got the roof, the doors, the wheels, the exhaust, the engine, all of those bits of the car are only really that, like, once you do that, the actual car doesn't exist. All the parts of the car are there, but the car doesn't actually exist anymore. It's not a thing underneath. So it's a little bit like that with Hume, that we think of it as this like solid thing, but it's just a bundle of stuff at that moment in time. When you take it apart, there's nothing there. It's just parts, perceptions, thoughts, emotions, feelings, all those things.
So that fits into Feldman Barrett, who was saying the brain is taking in sense data to predict and survive the next moment. And then how that, if we can survive the next moment, how does that link into maybe the next week, the next year, our story? That's interesting. And so therefore, Daniel Dennett, when he said it's a convenient self-fiction, that, the self, it's a convenient fiction. It's like, so Hume, I know Hume was very, some people said that he was almost Eastern in his thinking, weren't he? The Eastern researchers would say there is no self. If you can lose the self. And I think it was one of the Eastern books I'd read some time back. I remember them quoting some biological facts about our cells change and renew all the time, our physical cells, maybe it takes, I don't know, I can't remember, a year, 2 years for all the cells in your body to completely renew.
Yeah.
Not even physically the same thing. Michael Singer it was, in The Untethered Soul. And therefore, he's very Eastern, saying, so if there's no self, there's no problem. If you can let your old self die a lot, this type of Eastern thinking, and the ego is the problem, and that the more you can see through the story of me that you've created and see that it's a fiction, actually very relieving, because there's no pressure to keep up the act or the constant narrative, and it frees you up. And I think the big thing with that was non-attachment, if I remember, that therefore you get a lot less attachment to this me in the world and my unique tale, and I cannot imagine a world without me in it. So I'm hanging on in fear to everything. And I'm not too sure about all of that. I'm not, when the monks take it to the absolute depths of, go and live in the jungle and forget who you are and totally die to yourself and all of that. That hasn't necessarily been proven to be the ultimate, path to enlightened and all of this. So I think it's healthy to have the story going up to a point. When I've read Michael Singer or Eckhart Tolle or spiritual things, some of the Buddha and all this, what you do get, you get an instant relief, because you sort of like do come away from that story a little bit of the important me, and you let go of the reins a little bit, and it's a bit like, it's not like the determinism free will thing of, I can't do it, I'm no free will, I'm just a thing traveling through space and it's all been predetermined. But there is there is a letting go of total control and panic about, I've got to keep everything perfectly in line with who I think I am deep down, all my core values, all my beliefs. So I found that good. So in terms of Hume, what was his advice, after basically saying that, if he was Eastern influence or not, what was his advice?
This is another reason why I quite like him, because ultimate conclusion he gets to, because he had a lot more. This is just one factor that he focused on. He had a quite all-encompassing philosophy about, especially about cognition and how we make mental errors and things like that. So he was into lots and lots of stuff. So his ultimate conclusion, just generally on philosophy, was like, look, at the end of the day, you've just got to go to the pub with your mates and have a few beers and like not be thinking about this stuff. Because if you think about this stuff too much and for too long, there is almost a potential for like you're just going to lose the plot. It's so disconcerting, almost discomforting for some people that if they spend too long thinking about this stuff, like you said, in some ways you probably can lose that sense of self. Which in some ways you could end up in a flipping mental asylum or something, couldn't you, if you take it to the extreme? But I think even so, there's a bit of humour there with you, where even as like one of the most eminent philosophers in history, he still recognised some of the dangers of. But sometimes, pragmatically, you've just got to go and have fun with your mates and just joke with each other and talk about just ridiculous, absurd things that don't really mean anything, but it lightens you up a bit. But even in that little section we've just talked about, we've sort of proved that the self doesn't exist, I think. So if you think mentally, we've said, well, memory's flawed. So you can't remember. If I said to you, Danny, what were you doing on the 13th of January, 2002? You wouldn't have a clue. Like, there's literally no memory there. It's not that just you've got a vague recollection. You probably could if I gave you your diary or something and said, oh, well, here's a photograph from that day.
Yeah.
And you might go, oh, that sort of rings a bell, but you don't really know. So mentally, there's no persistence. There's no persistent thread going through in that sense.
Yeah.
And physically, like you said, well, we know biologically at a cellular level, they're turning over at a certain pace that eventually every single cell in your body has been replaced. So you are physically, you're not the same thing that was born or 10 years ago. It's constantly going through. That was one of Hume's ideas. I think he called it the persistence problem. There is no persistent thread that runs through either mentally or physically. So it's like, well, what does that mean? What are you going to do with that? It sort of just opens it up. And I quite like the analogy of a rope. So if you see a big, long, strong, like a rope you might see on a fishing boat or something,
yes.
Big, thick, there isn't one single thread that runs the length of that rope. It's lots and lots of different threads that have been wound together that then constitute the big rope. So it's a bit like that with these bundles. Like you've got all these bundles, probably millions, trillions of bundles all through life of these thoughts, etc. in that moment. And that's ultimately what it is. The self is just a fiction. It's not a thread that runs the whole thing. So then, like you say, it's like, well, what do we do with that? What did Hume think? He thinks, well, it's sort of nice to know that, but then don't get bogged down in it. Don't worry about that. Sort of use it. So I see it as a positive, proactive. It's like it's an action-based thing of, well, if I'm not wedded to a particular self, I can do anything. Like every day I can change who I'm going to be and what I'm going to do. And there's an active, proactive role in that, isn't there? Which for me is like, I think that gives a bit of energy and it lightens you up rather than thinking, oh, well, I've got to maintain this. Must be a nightmare for, say, politicians.
Yes.
If you're inconsistent or you change your mind or you maybe say, oh, yeah, I used to, but not anymore, that you're finished. People say, oh, that's like a negative thing to say to someone, isn't it? Oh, you've changed you. And it's like, it's a negative thing generally to not be this core thing that is just you. So, yeah, I think you can take it one or two ways. And I agree with Hume. It's probably not something you want to go down too many rabbit holes on. But I think you take it with a pinch of like light-hearted, see the absurdity in it and how funny that is, but the opportunity that brings.
Yeah, I think when we look at personality next time, that's a bit more of a surface type of game. Like a personality is almost like a way that you know you can get attention in the world for doing certain behaviors and things. It's like one good way of thinking about personality. It's like a trick you learn as a child and then you carry on and you just repeat it and you get expert at it. That just kind of becomes the way you operate. But the self is almost a deeper concept of the consistency that you kind of believe that you are deep down, that you've always been there inside watching everything going on and you're always in control and you're the captain of, this ship. And if you're not captain, or if something happens, or if you're not like you used to be, you should be panicking because it doesn't feel familiar and it doesn't feel like me. It's like, I don't feel myself is what people will say. Now, that could be partly because there's a presupposition that you should be yourself always, because you've got a sort of center of gravity, shall we say, that you operate at well within yourself, and you know that thing. So I'm not too sure about this going on full on Buddhist and totally, like Hume suggests, don't write it off. Don't say, it's like Spinoza's God, isn't it? Spinoza, we might do one episode. Yeah, okay, there's no God, but Spinoza's God. if it's functional and useful to you, then that's how God is. That's how, it's not necessarily some entity. It's a true thing there, but it's actually a useful thing that helps me in a way, what you might say pragmatically, or it just helps. So that's how I believe in it. So I think that could be true about the self. It could be some sort of like generalized anchor point that, if you go too far from it, you haven't got the skills or the capabilities to cope. So you've gone too far away, like out of yourself, that you can't transcend it. A good example. So I'm trying to get a bit fitter again, after COVID, having a young child and so on. And I was on the bike doing an old bike session this morning that I used to do. And I'm struggling on like the fourth set of this set, this power set. And I'm thinking, I have two more. Basically, I kind of pulled on, I was there, I pulled on my old. So, I think when you do certain physical sessions, it's fantastic. I always say this in sports, because you're very lonely and you really get down to you and your thoughts, and just you kind of want your mum, because there's no getting out of it. So you're sort of left on your own. So some of the best psychological sessions are the hard physical ones, where they endure a bit and you've got to talk yourself into it. So I'm down in the depths. I'm thinking, what are you doing? I'm feeling a bit weary. I can't keep the wattage up. I'm trying, and the clock looks like it's going backwards, not forwards. And I'm thinking, my legs, can't if I can push. And then I'm digging. I'm going, no, you're fit. You've always been fit. You've always been motivated. You always get through these sessions. Come on. So I'm talking to myself.
I love how you're even using the language, I'm talking to myself, but we've just said it doesn't even exist.
Yeah, and that's it. That's thinking of it as a sort of pragmatic story. I'm not thinking I'm a computer just making calculations. You can try that and it kind of can work, but I'm not used to that. I'm not used to feeling like a computer. I'm used to feeling like a human being. So I'm used to feeling like I am a self, and I have and I have a past, and I have an opinion of myself, and I have a self-concept, and I have self-esteem, and I have a self-identity who I think I am. So what I start doing when I'm deep down, it's sort of like I start pulling on those memories and old selves, try and help the current self, which is older, not as fit, not been in the gym as much, a father, is different. I'm a different man, I'm old, and there's practical things to that as well. Practical things like my muscles aren't as big. Leo, my son, had to sleep in my bed last night because for 3 hours, so I was tired. I was up earlier. I've got practical things. I'm not as fit as I was, but like biologically, my lungs and so on. Now, so what I'm doing, I'm pulling on that story, but fitting it into a new narrative of myself, which is I feel like I'm a different vessel that needs conditioning, if you know what I mean. I've got to look after this new me, and that might be new information, new fitness, new foods. I'm in a new phase, and what I can't do is just rely on past experiences and the old me. I've kind of got to be a blend. I've got to be new and old, if you know what I mean. I've got to modernize and develop. I've got to polish myself up for the place I'm in now. And therefore, I managed to get through the session, and then, collapse, let down, stuff like that. But I'm not doing it even my motivation isn't different. My motivation is to be strong and healthy. It used to be to win squash matches, but I'm not a competitive squash player anymore. I'm past competition. I almost see competition for me as a bit silly nowadays. When people say, "Oh, I've always been competitive," I can, they always compete at tiddlywinks, compete at this. There's never been. Well, I used to be a bit like that, but I'm not like that anymore. I don't know why. I'm just not. Now I might become that again, or I might become that next Tuesday when something really happens. And I don't know, but I'm open to renewal, and I'm open to like. But saying that, I still believe that there's a personality going on, which will cover next time. And I think sometimes we get mixed up with personality, which is the sort of habitual tricks that we use to get through our days and get attention and survive and make money and keep our mates, and this deeper sense of self. I think a personality is there. I think a personality is like a practical thing we use, like a tool to get through our days. That doesn't mean that because personality is quite, always the same, doesn't mean that there is this deeper, constant, like all-knowing self that's always there witnessing it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. A thing that's always fascinated me about this stuff is it's really, really quite deeply ethical. So there's like an ethical significance to this.
Yeah.
So if you think of how society is structured, and even now, like, so, you know, like we've been talking about our dads quite a bit and stuff because they're getting on and, you know, with various things there. And it's like, all right, so at the end of your life, so you see it a lot with people like Alzheimer's and things like that. When they're starting to lose their mental faculties, when do they stop being them? Like, when are they still them? When are they just like, yeah, they've gone. They're just totally like, they're basically just a body that's what's there. There's no sort of mental acuity going on. So that's quite, it's like, all right, well, that assumes that there is a self in there that is that person that can stop being a person before they've even like physically died.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. Think about as well in terms of crime. If you do a crime when like 30 years ago, are you the same person now who did that crime? Should you still be in prison or punished and those sort of things? Because the justice system works on that. It's like, no, you are you, and that you did that crime. But if you've got Hume and the boys coming and going, but there is no such thing. There was just that bundle of perceptions in that one moment. That person no longer exists.
Yes.
Pretty much. So how does then the law work and things like that? When you're drunk, are you the same person as that same underlying self that's underneath?
Yeah.
When you're on drink or drugs, and if you do something there that you wouldn't do when you're sober, well, what's going on there? What's the who's who? Is it the same one person doing it? Is it different? You know, that sort of thing.
You've been using there is person, and when you use person in law, that's we often look at that as third person. It's from the outside looking at somebody, that person, and that's where personality theory started to come in the late 1800s when they noticed people had what they now call multiple personality disorder.
Yeah,
people were just like way off it and stuff. So as soon as you start mentioning like the law and person, that's different. But the self underneath that from the first person point of view inside out, the phenomenology one, the thing inside looking out, that's different than this way we look at the bundle, what Hume called the bundle, from the outside and call that a person.
Yeah, but we don't look at the bundle as a moment in time. We look at the bundle as moving through time, don't we? As if it's the same bundle that is moving along. Whereas Hume is like, no, it's just...
You don't know as much from the third person as you do from the inside, constantly being in it. So you're making when you say a person, you've done a massive generalization and summary, and you go, you were born then, they did this, they did this, they did this, they did this, and so on, and then they died. That person did that. But the self is this more constantly there, first person, never switches off, even in your dreams. Now, what was interesting in Seth's book about becoming you, he opens up talking about the time he was put under general anaesthetic and said that is the only time that the self switched off because your consciousness is numbed out, your electrical activity or what have you. So basically, that isn't the same as going to sleep. He said you wake up from general anaesthetic, you could have been gone for 5 seconds, 5 hours, 5 years, and you wouldn't know. That's the only time that you're sort of not what you might perceive as this so-called self, where you're inside and there's all this stuff going on. But when you talk about a person, is that person guilty 30 years ago? What did that person do? That's a third person looking in thing. So a lot of behaviorism was in personality, which we'll look at next week. Because people couldn't get into people's heads and know what they were really feeling from the inside, behaviorism took off and said, oh, I know what they're like. Because they're doing these behaviors, they must be that. Because they give people money, that means they are kind. I know what that is. And then they studied animals and everything became behavioristic. But that's gone out of fashion a bit now, thankfully, because it's very general and narrow. And all you are is a collection of external behaviors. Now, that might be important, but it's not the whole picture. So it is interesting that. But I think, what do you think? Do you think that you have any sort of consistency underneath that's always been there? Have you a sense of that? Or do you think the consistency that you have is just basically been like your personality?
I think I used to think like that, like there was, like the classic You're a Starry movie. But honestly, when I think back to like who I was at school, and if I can't do it because it's impossible, but if I try and put myself back in that fishbowl, in my shoes, looking out at, say, 13, 14, 15, I honestly just like, I just can't imagine that. I'm going to use the word person again, but I suppose I am looking back on that as a third person almost now. But that's sort of the point. You can't physically imagine what you were like then.
No.
But I look back and you see yourself now and you're like, yeah, I'm told there's no way that's still me. I just can't identify. It's almost like a different character in a film.
Yes.
And it would have been even, I think that's good, by the way, but even 10 years ago,
Yeah.
5 years ago, we were just talking earlier about how much we've come on in even certain things, even in the last year. So you're always, I get sort of liberation from it. I think that notion of, you just bundles in these moments and don't get too caught up in that thread that has to run through, which is like you started talking about when you mentioned tolerant people. That is very Buddhist in a way. It's quite Eastern, because it does say, well, all you should focus on is the present moment, which I know one of our earlier episodes was on, well, you can't really do that because we live through time.
Yeah.
But I do find that quite liberating. It's like, well, do you know what? Just concentrate on the present moment. What are your current thoughts? What are your perceptions now? What are you feeling? What are your emotions about a particular thing? And you just go with that. You don't have to worry. Because even if, like, a thought experiment I've seen mentioned before is like, when you think about, so if you think about yourself and this self thing, you have a sort of a diminishing concern for that self. So you care less about your future self than your current self. Now, that doesn't really make sense if it's the same thing, Ruben. So you care less about Danny in 10 years than you care about Danny in 5 years, and you care less about Danny in 5 years than you do about Danny tomorrow. It's like a diminishing concern for yourself. So if that was it's like surely you would be equally bothered about yourself because it's the same thing, but we're not, which is quite a weird one to think about. It does, and then obviously you couldn't care less really about your past self because it's gone. It's like it's like, well, why would I can't really control that. So it sort of does lead you back to that thought of, well, yeah, all you've got is the present moment. Just concern yourself with that.
A couple of questions then. So, if we've got like embodiment, haven't we? We believe in embodied cognition as well, that your body plays a role in your kid. There is no separate mind and body and so on. So if your body's permanent in a way, or is the body not permanent either?
Well, on a cellular level, no, but I don't think it's impossible for us to. That'd be like you're on the Matrix where he's just seeing like the ones and zeros, and that'd be a pretty mundane thing if you weren't actually seeing. But then again, we know how much of perception's just flipping your brain, inventing stuff, isn't it? And like, creating images for you to deal with the current state of play, just to get through that moment, like you say, with Feldman Barrett and that predicting, right, I've got to walk from the end of this street to that end. Your brain's doing all sorts to get you through that moment that you're not consciously thinking about.
And when we watch the documentaries, like the Robbie Williams documentary, or, on these things, and they're looking back, do you think, we talk a bit about identity, don't we, and Sartre's bad faith, and you get stuck in an identity and you can't shake it. Do you think that's similar to this self stuff? It's like, this is who I am, I'm Robbie Williams, and I know, I've always been in my head and I'm this. Do you think that you are tethered to the past if you're not careful, and that these people would benefit from understanding Hume and
big time,
off the drugs as well, but just kind of like, why do I need to continue to be someone who needs the limelight?
Yeah.
Is that something embodied? Like a fighter needs to fight, or a singer needs to sing, a dancer needs to dance. Is there something physical in your body? If you're a mover, you need to move. I don't, what do you think about that?
I think it's both, but maybe it's to degrees. So say the Robbie Williams thing's really interesting in it. We talked quite a lot about that. Just, like what was going on there. That feels like, to me, it would almost be a bit of it's like a prison sentence. Like if your career is your name, like I know we all operate on our name, don't we? But if like your name is like that's who we're going to see, it's Robbie Williams. And Robbie Williams, I think that's more than personality, isn't it? It's a bigger thing than just he's like a good lad from Stoke, quite good looking, quite funny, cheeky chappy. That's different to the self. That feels like it could be a prison sentence to me. Same with athletes, which maybe is more physical. Because if your whole, say, 20, 25 years of your life is spent in this, again, I'm probably mixing it, but like persona, like this, like, say you're Mo Salah now, he's coming towards the end, isn't he? But he's right in his pomp in terms of he's just at the top of everything, isn't it? Everything's falling into play. But what happens when that starts falling away? Like you're just not quite as quick. You lose that split second, but you're there on you are Mo Salah. That is like who you are. And then it's like, well, when you get to the point you can no longer play football, that's very, I think to think like Hume is really helpful there, because you can go, well, I'm a new bundle now. That was the bundle then. The bundle's changed. So what am I going to do at this moment?
Novak Djokovic is interesting, and I work with characters like him and have done. And let's take his self. Deep down, he is a certain character, and his character gets him through. And when his physical capabilities drop, he ain't going to be like a singer losing the voice. He's not a Elvis, when he did in all that is that sort of. He's not going to necessarily be able to be the same person because he can't dominate on the court. Then he's going to find new sensations about himself. Like, I'm not winning matches I used to. I look weak. Then he's going to get frustrated. So often the psychology is going to start spinning out of control. And I think for an athlete, the challenge of not only adapting themselves, how they play sport right to the end, and how they view their role and themselves, I think that's healthy when you hear players saying, well, I lost my speed, so I just have to play there. Well, and that's back to Darwinism, is it's the most adaptable of the species that survive, not the strongest.
And it's dealing with the present moment, isn't it? This is the current thing.
This is what's in front of me, the new territory. How do I adapt and make it work? And I think for athletes, they get stuck a lot of the time, and they can't adapt because they've got all the love, all their attention, their embodiment is through that. They don't really know any other ways to be. So it's not surprising that there's a panic and a fear of this self it's not working for me as much, and then there's all these other ramifications, and then the brain predicts about the future. Oh my God, who am I? Literally, who am I? Who am I going to be? And how am I going to survive? Because when I'm not me. And I think a coach and a good coach helps and holds the hand of a person through all these changes. Because as much as we might say and assume in everybody, and there is no actual true self, but you actually experience yourself as a self. It is a convenient fiction, but that fiction, yeah, it's convenient, it's nice, it's good. I mean, we live through stories. Our brain compresses information into stories, and that's how we get through the world. And it's lovely. It's all the upsides of this as well as the down. So when I watched the Robbie Williams thing at the end, what I thought was all right was he went on stage or on a gig, and he'd had 3, 4, 5, 6 years off, and he went back on. He was coming back because he'd chilled out, and he thought, I still want to sing on my own terms. And he went and sang, and he was a pop factor or whatever it was called. He said afterwards, oh, I messed it up really. It was weird on there because Robbie Williams didn't turn up to sing it. Robbie sang it. So for me, that was a sign. He knew that physically something in he sensed that God, that was strange. Then he went back, we take that, got some confidence, so come back. And then I would like to think that the guy could go forward in his life like a good actor who doesn't have to do every movie that comes their way, just pick and choose when he wants to jump back into those qualities, knowing he's never going to be the Nebworth King and all, whatever, the biggest singer ever, but just having a different relationship with his performing and his singing than if a singer needs to sing and a dancer needs to dance and a tennis player needs to hit balls. I think that there's something about taking yourself less seriously as you used to, like Beauvoir said, the wisdom side of it, which is more, I wasn't even anything permanent even when I was achieving it, but I used to think I was God. I used to think I was it. I used to think I was, it was interesting. I was watching a film called Patton last night about the General Patton, the army leader, and he was telling a story in it about the good Romans that came back from war. And they used to be, when they'd won, they used to be on a chariot being sent through Rome. And all the crowds were cheering them, and the children were there in white robes, and they had, all the adulation of a famous warrior. But they would employ a slave to stand behind them, holding a gold helmet above their head, whispering in their ear, every great person falls. Attention is fleeting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was that's how he was telling this story when he'd basically been told to retire. And it was his way of saying, well, that was then, and this is now. Like, I'm gonna have to cope with it, because you have your moment and then it goes. And I think that's what I was trying to get at with my phases stuff in the research at the end, to say very, very healthy to be able to recognize when you're going into different phases and territories of your life, and like let the old self sort of almost realize that it can let go and it can be different. and you're not going to lose all your friends, and all your family are still going to love you, and you don't need as much adulation as you thought. And that doesn't mean you are betraying your old self. I think a lot of people feel like they put a lot of time in, or they've made a lot of sacrifices, and therefore I've made all this money, I've done all this, I better keep that going for everything. And if I turn my back on that kind of idealism or the way I thought, then I've copped out. I've opted out halfway through. I didn't see it through. I wasn't consistent to the end. And I think that that's a real golden cage type burden to put yourself in. Yes, it can help. Yes, it's obviously got you a lot of things in life and it's made you function. But if you can see that there's nothing permanent underneath, or should be anyway, then it's very, very liberating and non-attachment. You don't have to get stuck to it and non-attaching. And I've talked to this with players and athletes even recently, and once this is pennies dropped with them about this, and it can be like same with having children, same with old relationships. You don't, just because you were once friends, it doesn't mean that you have to be the best friends all your life. You have new friends, so then friends can be there and now and again, and you don't have to feel you're betraying them. And same with your sport. So you can stick to things and mess around, but you're not stuck with it. It's not clingy. And I think that you don't get clingy love. A good relationship is where you're probably both individually developing in your own ways, but not frightened that the other person's not going to love you anymore because you've changed. They admire it. They're changing. You're changing. They like it. And in some cases, even if you go really your separate ways, that's fine. You might move on to other things. But it's very interesting, isn't it? You don't. I think some of the players I've helped with this lately, and so on, and talked about, they've immediately said to me, oh my God, I feel so alive. I was stuck. I had energy. I was tight in my chest. I was running against the tide in a way. And now I feel like I'm swimming with the tide. This is just, you don't realize how you've relaxed me and opened me up. And it's given me and Felden Barrett would say, it's given you a new story of how your future might become.
Yeah, it's change. You mentioned the word change there. That underpins the people we work with, and that's really at the core of it a lot of the time, isn't it? It's the fact that change is inevitable.
Yeah.
Because we live through time, things are always changing. And Hume brought this in, so he related the self to that. He says something along the lines of when we see someone or something change gradually, so it's little by little by little, you barely, we said about earlier, how quickly November's come around, or nearly December, but it doesn't seem that long since summer was there. But day to day, you don't really notice it, do you? Those little tiny incremental things. And Hume said when things do change gradually, you're much less likely to ascribe change to the thing that is changing, as in the self, the person, whatever we want to call it. If it happens really, really gradually, you're almost not going to put it down to them changing. It's something else, because it's just so gradual to see. But when things change suddenly, rather than bit by bit, it's like overnight. It's like you put it down to the person, and that could be the same with athletes like Robbie Williams and things like that. If you're an athlete and you get a really bad injury and they have to cut your leg off, overnight, bang, that's that self definitely doesn't friggin' exist now, because you cannot physically do what you were doing. And that's a different ballgame, isn't it? To just gradually getting 1% slower every year, and then eventually you're 1% less strong in a particular move, and that's different, isn't it? And how we conceptualize that with ourselves, that's me, there's something core me here that's changing. How do I deal with that?
Dark, but shock, trauma, disease, things that really horrible things that can just happen, get a disease, and it's all I'm now not think about myself is that disease, and everything's me with that. They say I'm a cancer patient, say I'm not John anymore. It's so disorientating. So I'm not in for all this instant type of breaking the self down and going, you're not a self. I think you've got to be dead careful with it. I think, you can end up becoming a lunatic and going right off. And, really, and then practically a lot of the things in your life, it could be too quick, too soon, too much. So I think you need, there's no point me going into an athlete and going, you're a footballer. What do you actually think that is? You're not a footballer, really. You just,
Or you could get really quite nihilistic with it if you wanted, and just be like, well, there's no such thing as the self. Why do you care what you're going to do? You may as well just go and steal that person's car, because it'll be a different person tomorrow.
And I've said that a lot with the Eastern bits, and they're good, but if you go too far with it, it's like you zoom too far out, too far back from the earth, looking out, nothing means anything. Whereas if you're too zoomed right in on yourself too much, you think you're the center of the whole universe, and then it's just a scary, horrible, trapped in place. So another skill is like letting yourself rock. Have this rocking motion I've talked about, like where you can zoom in and zoom out to the gestalt, the bigger picture, and then back in on the little. And that is a healthy movement as well. I like the fact that my mum will say, oh, you've been the same since you were 2, and you always did this and you always did that. It was just who you were. And then I love the also fact when she says, gosh, you've really developed, you've changed. You used to be like this, you could have gone this way, but you went like that. And now you're so much more relaxed, or you've become a dad and it's changed you. And I never thought I'd see you like this. And I think that's lovely as well, isn't it? And even within myself, I think some of the things I'm most proud of deep down that get me emotional is the letting go of the clinging on to the things I thought were important about myself. When I can let go a bit and take my hands off tightly and like trust, like almost not have to be so serious and defined by things. That's where my heart opens back up in a weird way. I'm not as tight and I'm more gentle. And I think that's when I have a really good effect around the people around me. I can't be like that all the time. I go back into, I'm a self-important person and I need this my way. Because we talked about Nietzsche, didn't we? The will to power. My power, my individuality. We did an episode on the century of the self. The self is, buy things for you, go on your holidays, experience everything for you. Very what you call self-centered living and my power. But as that's dropped away, and it's hard to let it to drop away, not totally, but it's actually healthy, feels healthy in me in terms of breathing and sleeping. And it's hard for me because I'm a bit of an achiever. I was always someone who was driven and pragmatic and get things done. So for me, it feels lazy sometimes, and I feel took me a long time to get over the feeling I need to be busy, or if not, I'm lazy and I'm cheating. But I'm actually not like that ever anymore. I'm just happy and content, and I am aware that I have changed as well, and I think that's a nice thing. And that helps me when I'm working with young people. Let them go through that. Don't change them at the start. Let them make the mistakes. Let them go through. Let them come to those changes within themselves. Laugh at them a bit. Remember, you used to think you had all the answers to the world, and if you were just this would be it. And don't deprive them of that transition through their many selves if they can. Equally, if they're wonky and they struggle with mental health or what have you, and they found a little identity that just makes them tick, and they use it for 50 years, then fine as well.
I do think, though, I am a big believer that you should cringe a little bit. So when you think of yourself of 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10, I think it's healthy. It shows a level of some sort of progress in yourself. You're thinking, you sort of coming on a bit in your own, making sense of the world. It's nice to cringe a bit and go, oh my God, can you believe that's what I was like, or that's what I was did? I like that. I think it's more of a worry if you're like, oh yeah, I've literally not changed a bit in 10 years. That just shows you've got stuck, or you're not making any real depth of progress.
When you've done that, have you found yourself appreciating some of the people that helped you in your life when you must have been back being a bit of a knobhead, like you got stuck and thought you were a know-it-all?
See, I don't really think of people who have helped me in that way. I feel like I've very much helped a lot. I've never had a coach or in anything really, obviously like friends, and you could call like some friends maybe more of a mentor and people, but I've always been very self-driven in that sense, again using the word self, but self-motivated, self-learning, all that stuff. I've never really felt like I've had people, obviously your parents and like family and things, but never, I look back and think of specific people. It's usually people I've never met. So it's like Hume. When you read some of his stuff and then you change, don't you? It's like you've got a new outlook on the world. All the flipping hundreds of philosophers we've got into and looked at and stuff, they're almost like mentors in a way, I see. Even though you never meet them, reading a book, it's like you communicated with them in many ways.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, some of the best coaches, you've never met them because they've asked information. But I think what I'm saying is people who gave me jobs, people who put up with me when I was going on, people.
Yeah, but I don't. Were they consciously doing that with
No,
a grand thing?
no.
It's just they were in their moment, weren't they? Just like, I've got a job here. I need someone to do this. You just cross their path. I'll give Danny a job doing that. I don't think there's a bigger. You do get some people like that who I feel like a little bit myself now, and I always talk about my nieces and stuff, and I do sometimes like to think maybe I would be that kind of wise uncle, or at least a bit wiser than them, say, who maybe does help them along a bit, and then in 20, 30, 40 years, they do look back and go, oh yeah, that's quite a nice feeling. Even the people you work with and stuff, there's a niceness to that, isn't there? Maybe there was people who helped me along the way and I just didn't clock it at the time, and I had a sneaky, he'll never know this, but I know what I've just done there will put him on a different path.
That's what I mean. I mean, looking back, not at the time, but they put up with it. I appreciate, I don't know, it's like maybe I just appreciate people for putting up with me through those years and phases, even though it was bad, but I had quirks and stubbornness and certain ambitions, and I was like, probably said things and thought I knew it all.
You don't think that's the job though? Because I definitely think that with, like, say, like parents, Leo is going to put you through all sorts of turmoil. You just know at some point, once he's a teenager and that, it'll be carnage. But I often think, yeah, but that's your job. Like, you chose to have kids. You can't get any credit for that, do you?
It is the job, but you can still get good and bad parents, can't you? And you can still get good and bad friends and teachers. I just think some of them put up with a bit. I never said, oh, thanks for that, because I didn't appreciate it or know it at the time. Yeah. And I wouldn't ring them now. I just have a feeling on, oh yeah, so that makes me more patient for others. I went to a wedding the other week and it was just a bit like, it was in America and it wasn't going to be about us, and they were getting on with all their main things. But me and Laura just being at the wedding, I knew it had an effect for the bride and the groom. They loved it, but it wasn't about us going. It was about us just being there for them. And that was a new kind of thing, because normally it's like, well, what are we going to get from this? Is it going to be a good day? We're going along. It would just, no, you just need, you're almost paying back in because a lot of people did that for us.
Yeah.
Where when you were young, and they might have had to do it or not had to do it. But again, I just think it's nice you get older and you change. But so lastly then, to conclude, you're the, you know a lot about this really. What are the 2 or 3 bits of advice that you can maybe do this week on the self?
I like what you said earlier, that I like that analogy of the Zoom. I think that can help whatever predicaments you've got, whatever bundle you're in at that moment, thoughts, all that stuff. I do like your analogy of, like, sometimes it's good to zoom in a bit, and like maybe there is something you know what, you do need to make a change here because you've been a bit of a dick, or like that was wrong, there was a mistake you made, I shouldn't have done that. Sometimes it is good to look at yourself, isn't it, and go, right, I need to do something here, even though, like we say, it's just a story ultimately that you're probably creating. And then sometimes, yeah, you maybe do need to get quite Buddhist and just zoom out and go, do you know what, just like relax a bit, chill out, and not worry too much about that minute detail. I think that can help, and just working out where you're at in those moments. Like, have I got too zoomed in here, or am I too zoomed out? I'm not focused enough on something. I have just got, oh, what will be, it doesn't matter anyway. To the point of, like I said, you can get quite nihilistic. It's like, well, nothing matters. I'm not gonna make my bed. I'm not gonna wash. You can go to that level, because ultimately, what's the point? It doesn't matter. So I like that. I also like that, because a lot of what was winding Hume up, I think, really was, if you go back to the very start of philosophy, like I said, one of the first things is know thyself, isn't it? Yeah. That's probably the most famous philosophical quote ever, really, like going way back to the ancient Greeks. And Hume was just going, yeah, but you can't really know yourself, because when you look, there's nothing there. Underneath the surface, there isn't anything there. And I think he used this analogy of life being like a bit of a symphony. So it's just made up of all these different instruments, individual instruments that come together to create music at different times. And like it's the same with us. We're made up of all these individual perceptions that come together to create our identity. And it's just like, what's the music you're going to make? I think that can be a proactive thing. Like, what tunes are you going to play, and sort of get it going yourself. So I think it's one of them. There's less obvious practical takeaways. It's more of an idea of just thinking about it a little bit, and just clocking yourself, like, have I got too zoomed in, too zoomed out, and seeing how it works for you on that level, I think can help in that way. It's more of a reflective topic for me in some ways. And then it's then what does that reflection then lead you to do?
I like the idea of my last bit is it opens up a sense of movement. You can be consistent and inconsistent. You can change. You don't have to have a midlife crisis because you've frightened and go totally the other way. You can add a few things in. You can say yes to a few things you wouldn't normally have done and say no to a few things you would have done and live with that. And you can not drink as much. You don't have to be the guy who makes everybody laugh at the pub because otherwise they won't be your mate. You don't have to get stuck on a diagnosis if you've, got into something, lately and you've gone, oh my God, that's it. That's me, 50 years of life, that, new syndrome. It defines me every moment about it's like, well, does it really? It's partially not even anything to begin with. So it explains a couple of things, but you're not suddenly a set of symptoms in everything you've ever done, right? And also in your jobs, you can say, it's almost like more the psychologists that talked a lot more about context specific, even when we talk personality, it was most about the social construct stuff where you learn things for certain times and places. You learn how to operate. Your brain predicts ways of being, how to be. So you survive and thrive in certain conditions. Now, those conditions might move on in your life, so you've got to move with it. So if you were peak years, 1970s, you've got a certain type of mode of character. Doesn't mean you've got to forever live in the 70s with the 70s you. You can jump back in on a retro night and play the music and do the dance, remember things, but you can also go, but that wasn't all it was cracked up to be. I mean, there were some good bits, but it was hell as well. So that when we looked at the nostalgia episode last time, that it's that even balance on nostalgia, it used to be good in the 80s, but it was also not good as well.
Yeah.
So that these are the good days now, and how do I want to live now for these? So you can, you don't have to be tied like hamstrung to all your past, but you can bring. That's what Heidegger talked about, wasn't it? As well about legacy and heritage. He called it. It was very interesting about resoluteness. How do you go forwards in your life more resolutely? And he said, take from your past the bits that work and you want now that will work now, and go forwards, renewing yourself, So the present moment is a moment of vision. It's a new moment of vision. And I think that by not believing in a stuck self, I think you're more likely to get genuinely creative about moments of vision and how good the future can be. And Feldman Barrett would say that's great because you're constructing emotions then that are better because you believe that the future is bright. That's pretty good. That's, for me, how it ties into the psychology of your mood and how you see your future, basically, even if you're going through a bad time.
When we dance, the journey itself is the point. When we play music, you will simply become completely absorbed in sound. And therefore you will find yourself living in an eternal now in which there is no past and there is no future and there is no thing called difference between yourself and the world of nature outside you. This is red, this is green, this is something, this is nothing, this is solid, this is space. Between yourself and the world of nature outside you.